This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through iZotope, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Remember I was telling you how hard it is to hear second harmonic?
Yeah.
Just for your own ears. Now you're going to hear it because there's third harmonic in there too. But just an experiment, put some music in there, maybe not much compression going on, just saturation. Turn the second harmonic all the way up. Tweak that all the way up. And keep adding saturation, and you'll see it's pretty crazy. You can add, we have a meter. This is another thing we always do, is really decent metering, so you know where you are in the danger zone. Watch our meter, and you can put 14% on there with the second harmonic turned all the way up, and it's not that obvious. Really, the second harmonic's very hard to hear.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced iZotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a very special guest. It's Dave Derr from Empirical Labs, a musician.
Howdy.
Good to have you here, dude.
Thank
a
you.
musician raised in a family of engineers destined to rock and make his mark on the recording industry. Dave started with studying classical piano, composition, and theory as a music major in college, but still loved ripping guitar solos on his '67 Gibson SG Special. This passion for music led him to a 12-year journey with the band Jack of Diamonds, touring the Philadelphia, Delaware, and Maryland areas. But Dave wasn't just rocking the stage. He was also the guy fixing the band's guitars, keyboard rig, and PA systems.
I played lead soldering iron also in the band.
I bet that felt really great on your fingertips. This hands-on experience started his path to becoming an electronics technician and eventually a studio engineer. Dave landed a gig at Eventide and worked along industry giants, contributing to the design of iconic gear like the H3000, the H3500, and the DSP 4000. And after hours, he was running his own home recording studio, refining his craft night and day and recording and understanding the sound of music. In 1994, Dave's talents culminated in the creation of the Distressor, an iconic and modern classic that's now a staple in major studios worldwide. Empirical Labs now has, believe it or not, over 42,000 Distressors sold and an entire line of analog processors and digital plugins. And their latest creation, the Pump, a powerful 500 series compressor based on the Distressor. Actually, I've got a little picture of it right here. Look at that right there. There it is. Is breaking new ground for getting killer sound in your studio or out in the field recording or live sound or anywhere you need to get your audio to sound great. I'm super excited to have Dave joining us on the podcast today. This is a huge day for me, for the show, and definitely a bucket list interview. So please welcome Dave Derr to Recording Studio Rockstars. Dave, my friend, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am, Liz, and greetings everyone joining us. It's a pleasure for me and honor for our company, so thank you.
It's awesome to have you here, man. Before we roll into this too deep, I want to remind the rock stars listening that if you're curious about these fantastic plugins that they've made at Empirical Labs, the Arouser and the Big FrEQ plugins, go to empiricallabs.com directly. And we actually have, Dave's been generous enough to give us a custom coupon code, RSR10. You can get 10% off either one of those. So just wanted to let you know right away.
Thanks,
Dave. Great to have you here on the show, dude. Thanks for being patient with my long-winded intro.
That's good, though. It gives me time to think what I'm going to say.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about where you're joining us from right now.
We're in Parsippany, New Jersey, a little town called Lake Hiawatha, actually. And it's about 20 minutes west of New York. So when we have conventions in New York, we just drive in and out. It's very convenient for that. And we have our own building and parking lot and all that here at our facility.
That's very convenient. Yeah, it's nice to see you when I was at AES myself and when I got to NAMM. You've always got a cool booth. Your booth always looks like one of the really fun ones. I don't know, something about all the Empirical Labs.
Gil.
It just looks cool.
Gil Griffith helps bring the fun to our booth.
Now, you guys have been working together for quite a long time?
Yeah, we met. He was at Eventide when I joined. So that was mid-'80s, late 80s. So, yeah, I've known him well over probably 35 years, I bet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been great.
Well, let's see. Let's learn a little bit more about you, if you don't mind. I mean, I kind of gave a brief introduction, but in your own words, give us a little brief arc of you starting out in music and ending up where you're sitting in this cool studio right now joining us.
Yeah, like a lot of people in the industry, I'd say probably 95 or more percent started as a musician for the love of music, wanted to be a rock star, and was kind of in my own little world for over a decade. And again, I was lucky because my family had a very techno side. Both my brothers were engineers, so I was always kind of rubbing shoulders with technical people. And then in the band, like you said, started maintaining stuff. So got experience with what goes on inside and had really a fortunate string of events that led me to have my own company, including when the band broke up, I ran into a stranger at a Radio Shack, which I miss these days. I think that was a very good outlet for people to get into electronics.
Me too.
And, yeah, I know. It's a shame. But so I was asking about the IC information because I could tell he was very picky about what he was selecting there at the store. And he said, he had seen my band too. He knew who I was. He said, "Are you looking for a job?" And I go, "Well, I don't know." But then that led to a job at a medical firm in Philadelphia area that made basically brainwave recording systems, wireless brainwave recording systems. And that was my first technician job there. I had a really great, my bosses were great. And one of them, Jim Bryan, who recently passed away, had infinite patience with me. I would want to play with, I breadboarded things with a breadboard from Radio Shack. And he was always there to help me, encourage me. And I saw in a newspaper article that Eventide was looking for an engineer. And I said, I can't see this costing me anything if I fail. But I went to the interview, and Richard Factor, the owner of Eventide, interviewed me. And I was very, very lucky. He gave me a break, hired me, even though I was not anything like the other trained, educated engineers. They were very schooled, and the math chops of what I had was nothing compared to what these guys had. So yeah, that was Eventide really set up for Empirical Labs. Empirical Labs wouldn't be here if I hadn't been luckily hired by Richard Factor at Eventide.
Was there a lot of math doing the kind of stuff you guys were doing?
Oh yeah, especially with I did a lot of the PC board design and converter design, but plugins, I just did the superficial plugin creation. I'm sorry, preset creation, while those guys were doing the heavy duty math code in the algorithms, which I could never even touch that. So yeah,
that's pretty wild. So you were at Eventide for a while. How long were you over there?
I think it was 7-8 years. I should know, but I know it's one of those 7 or 8 years, I'd say.
And then what was the the birth of, well, here, let me back up a little bit. So now you had an interest in music too. You were playing and doing the band thing, and touring and talk a little bit about that. Your instrument was playing guitar. Yeah.
I played guitar and keyboards.
And keys.
My first love was guitar, though, but my family was very musical and technical. We always had a piano in the house. I have fond memories of us singing around the piano very badly.
Yeah.
But, so basically, it was keyboards and guitar, but most guitar was the start.
Well, I've got a link to a video of you guys performing. I think it was 2011. Jack of Diamonds, and it's you taking a guitar solo, and it's epic. It's great. It was really fun to watch too, because I didn't, you meet people like yourself when we go to NAMM, when we go to AES, and of course, I was introduced to the Distressor. It appeared in the studio I was at in the 90s here in Berry Hill, and it was just like, we're just like
you got in early.
The sound of angels, like, the stuff you could do using that was just. It just opened up a whole world of sound. But then, but you don't know anything about you until more recently. And going and listening to you perform, and you're a great guitar player. I mean, you're playing badass slide solos and keyboard parts.
Well, thank you. Those days are gone. I literally kind of quit playing about 10 years ago, right after that gig.
Really?
Yeah, very sadly. But you know what? If I start to slow up, that's what I'm going to do is get back into playing.
Any more sitting around the campfire doing bad harmonies with families or anything like that?
No, not so much.
Not so much.
Most of the family does still live in Delaware, which is where we started. But no, we don't get much chance to sing anymore. However, at Christmas time, sometimes we'll pull out a guitar or a keyboard and sit around and do some carols.
Nice. So the Distressor, one of the things that was fascinating about it when it appeared was it had this additional feature, the Distortion 2 and Distortion 3 in there, which were, to me, they were brand new ideas. It was a way of having some control over that. And it occurred to me to ask you the question, because you seem to have a real appreciation of the importance of harmonics and saturation and distortion in a sounding great. Do you think that there's something to be said for as a guitar player, that you were very focused on what is great distortion and what's not right and things like that to give you an ear to be able to build the kind of gear that you've built?
Well, to a degree, sure. Growing up, my brother Mickey actually helped build a distortion, a fuzz pedal, that we made. It was germanium, which now is highly cherished. But yes, I'm sure my ear was tuned a little bit, but in our gear, most of the harmonic distortion is not heard as such.
Yep, right.
You don't really pick it out as, that's fuzzy. But we have great tools, test tools, and it's a combination of ears and tools. And for instance, now I've looked at distortion so much on scopes and analyzers that I know what is going to fly and what isn't just from the looks of it. But you still use your ears. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because the Distressor, from day one, we started with some form of gushy harmonic distortion.
Yeah.
It was, if I may, it was created during a time when the transition from analog recording to digital recording was happening. So people, right off the bat, you remember all the complaints and stuff. Oh, it sounds cold and chilly, whatever. So I was in my mind at the time to make something that could bring back some of the softness and take off sharp edges.
Right. Okay. So, you're really answering that question, but if somebody doesn't understand about distortion in gear, even though it's labeled as DIST, it's not, don't think about it like a distortion in a guitar amp or something. It's a harmonic, saturation or something that, and you guys use terms like smoothing out the high end, and there's also a quality, there's a fattening quality for sure in Empirical Labs gear. When I put
harmonics, the low frequency harmonics, FYI, in general, the low frequencies have a higher peak to peak amplitude. If you looked on a scope, let me see if I can get my hands in the picture.
Yeah.
If you look on a scope, low frequencies have higher peaks, bigger swings. So those are what get saturated first, generally. And when you saturate low frequencies, that's a wonderful thing, because if you take one of our demos, as a matter of fact, is taking 60 hertz, putting it through a speaker unaffected, and it's very hard to hear. You can feel it more than hear it. And then we turn on some saturation, and all of a sudden the harmonics help it poke out.
Yeah.
So very important for low frequency clarity.
Yeah. So I recently hooked up, we did some rewiring in my studio, and I've got my new Distressor and pump on the patch bay. And so I was able to really dive in and listen to some of the ways that both of those would affect things like different drum mics, the bass guitar, guitar mics, vocals. And I have to be honest, Dave, I felt like I was waking up in the Matrix. I felt like it was like, there was this
without the fear.
No, not without the fear, without the with the oh, now I can see, now I can hear, now it's clear.
Oh,
it just reminded me how exciting it is to use the hardware and be able to dial in sounds like that and hear the sound just come at you out of the speaker. It really is a wonderful experience. So nicely done.
Oh, well, thank you very much. There was inspiration, which I think we'll get to in some of the following questions.
Yeah. So let's see. Tell us a little bit more about the beginning of, figuring out what the Distressor was for you. And then I know we want to talk. We have a lot of amazing stuff that you guys make at Empirical Labs now. So I want to make sure we get to talk about all the different things like the Fatso, the pump,
sure,
and other things. But obviously, like the very beginning of the Distressor, like where did that come from for you?
Well, first of all, I don't know why, but I had a fascination with compression since the 90s, maybe even the 80s. I can remember in a studio, somebody had a Compex. This was in Philadelphia. I believe it was KGEM recording. And I remember they were listening to the room mics on the drums as we're getting sounds. And I was sitting there actually talking with somebody, and all of a sudden I heard the sound. I'm like, what's that? And I said it very softly so that it didn't disturb the engineer. And our sound man, Craig, said, I think he just turned on the compressor on the room mics. So that was kind of my first, I kind of see how compression could do magic.
Yeah.
And in my own life, and we'll probably talk about this maybe a couple times, in my studio, it was just a home studio, had very little live space. So the sound was generally pretty dead. And I remember my best friend at the time, John Patterson, said, you need an 1176 and an LA2A. And I go, really? Those are expensive. And he goes, yeah, these will change your life. And he was right. We got I actually got two 1176s for $800.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were the old blackface. Still have them. In fact,
those are the ones behind you, probably behind your head.
Yeah, those are they. And, of course, when you first get something like that, I didn't know how to use it whatsoever. And I was used to a threshold compressor. where you adjust the threshold. And these, like the Distressor, the 1176s, are fixed threshold. In other words, you turn up and grind the level into it till it starts to compress. So it was a little bit new for me, but thank gosh, my buddy John was there. And John, by the way, he was working with Phil Ramone towards the end of that time. So big studio guy, lots of experience. So I had a session there one day, and John fussing with drum sounds. And John came in and said, "Here, give me a second." And he hooked up a Neumann, the only Neumann I had, put it in the hallway of the stairs, going upstairs from the main studio, cranked in the 1176 with I think it was on 8-1 or maybe higher. And you get that all of a sudden in my little room. And I was literally sitting there stunned, and I'm going, "What is that?" He goes, "That's 1176, and that is one of the prime uses for it was these room mics." And it literally changed my sound, because all of a sudden my drums had a live quality to it, sounded much bigger, and the drummers always loved it. So I got known for having a studio sound based on John's very simple 1176 trip.
At iZotope, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the iZotope plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at iZotope.com. Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, the discovery of compression, as I remember, is, I feel like when I learned about it, because I came from the school track, so like they're teaching me how these things work before I had any clue what they did, or why they were useful. And, they teach it in terms of controlling things that are too loud. But I feel like when you learn what they do, no, they take the stuff that you weren't hearing and they bring it to the foreground and they make it exciting.
Really? Yeah, that was a real goal, was because, again, I had experience with classic compressors by the time I started designing the Distressor. And just what you said, excitement. I mean, some stuff you don't want excitement, but generally bringing up all those little nuances into your face, that creates excitement and immediacy.
So the Distressor you designed, and this is true of the pump, this is true of the Arouser, you designed the similar to the 1176, where it's a fixed threshold and you can bring up the input to hit the threshold. Yes?
That's right. Yeah. And, once you get used to that, of course, there's so many beauties to that method. One is your output is, when you grind up, you've already set your output level.
Yeah.
So when you start, kind of that output level is pretty locked into within a couple dB. With a threshold knob, you start to move that, and all of a sudden the output goes all over the place.
Right.
So in a way, it's safer with a fixed threshold, which it's hard to adjust to at first, but then you're like, okay, more. You don't have to worry about the output going anywhere.
Another thing that is in the Distressor, which we mentioned earlier, the distortion, and I'm using the right, DIST is how it's usually labeled.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you guys are calling it distortion, so distortion or dist 2 and 3, you had a home studio, or you had a studio and you were making records and you were working in other studios, as you say. So, and a lot of that was on tape, right? And did you have a tape machine yourself?
Yeah, we had a couple tape machines. Our first major tape machine was a 16-track 3M machine called an M56. And it spoiled me because it was all Class A, and literally I had to recalibrate the meters because it could handle so much level. So that was my first multi-track, and then I got an Atari, what was it?
Was it a 24-track or something? Yeah,
it was a 24-track Atari, and I love that, MX80.
Yeah, so was there a quality to tape that inspired you to want to create the Distressor? Like, was there, with the transition from tape to digital or something?
Yeah, in hindsight, it definitely did. But, but when I first started, I didn't even have a multi-track digital recorder. But again, with my friends and stuff, I had people that would keep their eye out for stuff I might want. And again, my friend Craig Melvin bought Sony, what was it called? The first 2-track recorders for 30 years ago. We ended up getting one of those that recorded onto videotape, encoded it and put it onto videotape. So I was mixing to digital quite early on. And boy, I love that because I had already gotten the analog, pretty much the analog sound with the multi-track, and having this pristine format to mix to, gave me a little bit of a heads up.
Well, also
on a lot of people.
The final mix was headed for CD at that point anyway, right?
Just starting to, yes. The answer is yes. Around, I think CDs were kind of big around 85, 84. They started getting big. So, yeah, we knew we were going to end up usually on a CD, but a lot of people in the late 80s were still putting out on records, vinyl.
Was that the Sony VHS digital format that was like called F1 or something like that?
That's it. It was the F1 format, but our actual encoder was a 501, Sony 501. I think it was ES 501, but it was the exact same F1 format, and you could use really any video recorder with a bandwidth. So it could be cassette recorder, VHS is what I was using.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was, again, it was nice because I didn't have a big Ampex machine to mix to. So it was really a pleasure to have this super quiet format that really gave back what I put into it.
Yeah. I did one session where we were mixing or maybe even mastering to one of those machines, and I'd never seen one before, and I thought that was fascinating. And, of course, the VHS format, what was it, SVHS was our ADAT format, which was so prevalent in the 90s, and that's where I started, and what essentially gave me an opportunity to be in a studio that could make all these indie records like a real studio because we could afford these ADAT machines. But the caveat for the ADAT chapter was our sounds needed a lot of help, So when the Distressor came along, it was really a game changer. It really let us make things sound fat and huge and helped a lot.
Yeah, and again, the inspiration was that moment with the 1176s, and again, getting that kind of a smoothed out sound was a big goal.
Yeah. Well, let's jump forward for a moment. We got a couple of things I definitely want to focus on, but since we're discussing the Distressor, let's tell us about the new pump, which is a 500 series compressor. What is it?
It was born because, the Distressor, if I had my studio, I wouldn't be able to afford a Distressor because, they're pricey. Not as pricey as some things, but, over, $1,500 to $1,600 is out of some people's price range. But again, we wanted to come up with something that was more affordable, but still had the same vibe as the Distressor. So the pump was actually originally designed 14 or 15 years ago, the first prototype. So the design's been around a long time, and we wanted to make it simple to use, but still work and sound like a Distressor. We used different typed circuitry, but again, I know I've been doing this for a long time. I knew what was important to maintain the quality. And one footnote that was really a interesting development, we had put out the Arouser shortly after I had done a prototype of the pump.
Which is a fantastic plug-in, Rockstar. So definitely want to check that one out. That's a plug-in version of the Distressor with some extra bells and whistles.
Yeah, we are still very proud of it. So the Arouser, one of the bells and whistles you just mentioned, was this feature called AtMod. And during the development of the Arouser, I'm constantly A/Bing this thing with classic compressors like the 1176s, along with our own Distressor, etc. And we got a early rev, and literally under a microscope, I brought in we have a couple guys here with really good ears. So I brought them in. I said, check this out. I'm putting on like 15, 20 dB of compression on a percussives. And I said, I'm matching everything. It's really close, but I'm hearing something right on the attack. And the two of the guys agreed, said, yeah, we hear that too. What is that? And I said, I don't know, because basically the overall time constants were identical. However, using our microscopic techniques with our test equipment, I found that there was a little envelope shaping going on in these 1176s and the Distressor. In just the first millisecond, literally microseconds, there was a little bit of a visible attack envelope difference. And of course, I can't tell you we just spent like 6 months getting the first rev of the Arouser going, how crushing it was, just saying, okay, there's this intangible now. I don't know what the hell this is. I want this, when I say something sounds like it, can sound like it. I want it to sound like it, even with a lot of compression. So anyway, the long story was, worried. That night, I actually was very, very upset because I'm like, oh my God, do I have to go back to the drawing boards? And what we found out was it was something that happens unplanned, undesigned inside of these older compressors and inside the Distressor, something unintended. And that changed or warped the attack shape a little bit in a very musical way at high gain reduction.
Right.
So when I found that, I found out how to duplicate it, gave a name, AtMod, for attack modification. And possibly one of the first instances, we took a software feature and ported it to our pump hardware. So
that's
usually
so cool.
Usually you go from hardware to software. And this was in a case where the software tried to model the hardware, and then we tried to model the software in our hardware. So because again, it was subtle and you wouldn't never hear it except for at high gain reduction, which is one of the beauties of some of the 1176 and the Distressor, is you can slam things. So.
Yeah, well, the attack mod is well, first of all, the Arouser is awesome. I love it. I've been using it for years in the studio. I'm on a Pro Tools HDX system, and I just absolutely love the fact that both the big FrEQ EQ and the Distressor, I could start using them right at the tracking stage. I don't have to wait until I'm in mix mode.
That's
mindset,
great.
Because then you can sort of get your sounds while you're recording.
We supported that AAX, S6L and all that for live recording. So, by the way, it's very expensive to support all these formats.
I bet.
But we felt it was important with our first plugin to support pretty much all formats. So,
I mean, I don't know if we need to go too far on it or not, but it occurred to me to ask you, when I think about the Distressor, I mean, you suggested that it's an investment piece of gear for your studio. It's not the one you don't buy it at the checkout lane at the grocery store, but it's, but it made me think, like, as the first piece of equipment that you made back in the 90s too, like, what was it within you that sparked the desire to create such a quality piece, like everything from the physical build of it to the weight and half to the knobs and the meters, like every detail is super exacting. Even you joining us on a video call today, you guys have such a great video presentation. So you have a real appreciation of quality and things you build.
Yeah, well, again, I was instilled growing up. All of us are kind of, if you get a great car or neat piece of equipment, it gives you respect for high quality stuff. And fortunately, I worked at Eventide, which was really cutting edge digital technology. So, and they had a very, very high standard for what they released. And again, appreciation to Richard and everybody at Eventide for that chance, because it shaped my taste also. And then to go a little further to your detailed question, when I got something like the 1176, it had imperfections. They didn't have even good power supplies, honestly, back in the 70s and 80s. So I wanted to have even better. I wanted to outdo, at least measurably, the performance of some of those older devices, but have that vibe, have that gushy vibe. And then I made a couple notes of what you mentioned. For instance, the bar graph, one of the things with the 1176, at the time, there weren't schematics out there. So the internet this was before 1990. That's a lie. But right after 1990.
Yeah.
So schematic, I had to reverse engineer it. And doing that, you see some details and also some flaws. So one of the things was very quickly, I said, that meter's way too slow on the 1176 and LA2A. You can't really, and of course, to some people it's reassuring because it never looks like you're doing 20 dB of compression. It never gets up that far. Transients come through and the meter, doesn't go like this.
Right.
But I wanted to be able to see that. So we went with a bar graph, a high resolution 16 segment bar graph. And that's, again, because that feels more analog. If you have even an 8 segment bar graph, you feel each LED,
Mm-hmm.
So we made it high enough resolution that you can really see fine gradations of gain reduction. And it's also really reproducible. Being reproducible is very important.
And I notice it. Even when I was playing around with the Distressor and the pump in the studio. It hit me that a lot of, whether I'm even noticing that I'm looking at all those lights on there, I am. My peripheral, I might be listening and turning the knob, but my eyes are catching the light movements, and it really is part of a performance. And, using the Distressor, using all of the tools that you make at Empirical Labs, it lets us as engineers and producers in the studio feel like we're performing.
Ah, cool. Yeah. Again, a lot of it was about look and feel. And again, the big bar graph was very important to me because the prototype, which we still have, I think only had 8 LEDs. And it was only maybe that wide, 2 or 3 inches, where I said, no, I want to be able to see that in the back of the room, So expanded it, made it, I think it's almost 5 inches long or something, the bar graph. And then while we're on the size subject, the knobs.
Yeah.
That was another, something that was important at Eventide. They always had a big knob. Now, we used it for soft keys, soft parameters, adjustment. There's something about, when you have a little teeny knob, it just feels more touchy. Mm-hmm. And less friendly. Mm-hmm. So I started the search for the knobs, which a lot of my friends to this day remember finally coming to my studio and seeing a different knob on the Distressor for several months.
Oh, at different times as you tried things out to see which one you liked?
Yeah. And believe it or not, our plan wasn't white knobs at first, but we got a sample of a white knob. It wasn't all white, but the grip part was white. And so I liked that look as it got into the studio. Jumped out. Yeah, you can't miss them, right?
Sure, right there, right?
Yep.
Such a classic.
So, it was probably 6 months before we finalized the one, and we had to go with a custom design because the skirt had to be the same color. We had high resolution numbers and markings for recall.
Right.
So that was literally... People laugh when you talk about knobs. We spend a lot of time on the knob, but in the long run, it comes to make a difference, right? Look and feel and
it does.
Friendliness, and you grab that thing and you know where you're going to go with it.
As a guitar player, I think any of us would appreciate it. You appreciate that too. Like, yes, sure, you can have a cheap $100 guitar that does a cool thing for one move on a song in a studio. But when you want to really have a beautiful guitar that just will play anything you need it to, it's got to really be playable. And that's how the Distressor particularly feels to me. It's the build quality is so great that you feel like you really are in control of things. And beyond that, it just sounds amazing. I mean, really, like, to take any sound that I might have recorded in just straight through a mic pre and then put it back out through the Distressor and tweak it a bit, it just brings it to life. You can find such a huge variety of ways to dial a sound in with what you've built. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus, Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode.
Yeah, and getting back to your question about why the Distressor and how we ended up with it. First of all, I wanted, one of the things was when I got the 1176s and the LA2As, you want more of them. So that was the mother of invention, was I wanted something to get that sound, get those sounds. And again, having the tools available and things to work with and model right in front of me, I was able to a large degree, capture the good part. But again, some of the bad parts we could tweak. And obviously, I mentioned the power supply. Our power supply is 20 dB quieter than those vintage power supplies. And we also, again, really agonized over reproducibility. We needed really good pots. And I found ways to, whereas like 1176s and some of the LA2As, they're incredibly component reliant. The dependency on the specific component is really big, and we just really wanted consistency. And I was able to, over time, pick good parts and offer consistency while giving you some new features like the big bar graph, but as you said, the Distort 2 and the Distort 3, which were really basically created by adjusting feedback paths within the Distressor to bring out certain harmonics.
Yeah. And now the pump also has a distortion and a low cut on the detector circuit. And so maybe we should talk about that too. What are the similarities between the pump and the Distressor? I think that probably is a common question for people as they think about that. Maybe it's common across all of it. Maybe it's, okay, the Distressor is maybe sort of a more of an investment for your studio and kind of a gold standard of compression. When you're looking at the pump or even the Arouser plugin, what would you like to say about some of those similarities and differences for the Rockstars?
Well, with the pump, it's pretty different circuitry. We use a lot of different key components. But again, over the 20 whatever years, hopefully I learned a lot. And so with the tests and stuff that I developed, I was able to pretty much make it compress like a Distressor using different but more consistent components. Mm-hmm. Again, we made sure the curves, the time constants, many of the basic functions, literally we tested in the studio here. Can you hear this? Which one do you think is the Distressor? Which one do you think is pump? Those kind of blind tests. So that was a goal, really be able to get the sound. However, the Distressor gives you more harmonic choices. Because of the circuitry inside, we allow you to, for instance, emphasize the second harmonic or the third harmonic. And that's a difference. You can't really do that. We just do third harmonic and odd harmonics in the pump, more or less.
Okay, third or odd. So how should we think about second order and third order harmonics for those of us who don't know why we're supposed to pick one or the other? What's a good way to think about that stuff?
Honestly, the one you hear is the third harmonic. Odd, let me say odd harmonics. Third, fifth, seventh. They are what flatten the peaks on tape. We always talk about tape saturation, which is a very visible and measurable thing. So scrunching get my hands in here in the picture.
There you go.
Scrunching the tops and bottoms down are very important to give you more headroom without sounding softer. So the odd harmonics do that. Second harmonics, I've done a lot of experimenting, especially at Eventide again, as we started trying to make distortion software, which is quite hard even to this day, but it's being done. And playing with second harmonics, because Ken B and Bob Belcher, who are now at Sound Toys, were the engineers that I worked under at Eventide, and they created some distortion algorithms where you could literally pick out your harmonic that you wanted to emphasize. And Lidge, I'm telling you, even harmonics are very, very difficult to hear. Literally, I remember one day in the lab at Eventide, I was turning up second and fourth harmonics only, which don't really flatten the peaks. They kind of tilt the waveform. I know that's an abstruse, abstract concept, but it's not hearable. And I remember one day I'm in there and I'm saying, what's going on? I'm not hearing this. And I'm turning the knob. I said, let me get my distortion analyzer over here. So went and got the distortion analyzer and made sure that I was listening to 30% of second harmonic distortion. And
still, it's just not all that audible.
No, below that, I'm serious. Even Richard Factor had good ears himself. He's a music lover, music fan, music lover with good ears. And I actually walked across the hall because his office was directly across the hall. I said, Richard, can I borrow your ears for a second? And he goes, okay. And he's always up for helping us. He charged into the lab. I said, Richard, I want to A-B this. I'm going to bypass this function. I matched the levels very, very carefully, of course, was key. And I said, okay, here it is, bypass. This is this. We were listening to music. I said, here it is bypassed. Here it is in. Do you hear much difference? He goes, I don't hear much difference. And I said, I want to show you something. And I enabled the distortion analyzer. And he knew what distortion analyzers we're looking at. And he goes, that's a lot of even harmonics. I go, I know. I said, I can't believe we can't hear it at 30% almost. So that was an eye-opening thing. So what they do, especially on low frequencies, which is why people like some of the Class A stuff, because Class A often has a lot of second and even harmonics, is on bass. It adds our octave to what the bass tone is. So your second harmonic is an octave above. It adds octaves to your source. So on low frequencies, it was more audible. Literally on little speakers, something would jump out that you couldn't hear without the harmonics.
It's more of a fattening, a biggening of the bass.
Yeah, but I tell you, to this day, it still amazes me how inaudible the octave harmonics are.
So if we use the third harmonic setting, dist 3 button on a Distressor, for example, does that give you both second order and third order harmonics, or do we think about it like a choice, or is it, I mean, I know in the end, you just kind of listen. You just go with what sounds best, right?
Yes, but to answer your question, when you choose the third harmonic mode, you are still getting some second harmonic. And a second harmonic, depending on your compression setting, can be raised or lowered a little bit because it basically starts attacking on the actual per cycle. Mm-hmm. But the second harmonic mode on the Distressor also adds odd harmonics also. So it's not really all or nothing of either. They're always usually blended. But if anybody ever scopes them out, which people do, you can clearly see that the third mode, the Distort 3 mode, really adds a lot more visible clipping, and the Distort 2 mode is, while visible, is not as audible.
What are some use cases? Well, you said bass is a great place to explore the Dist 2. Do people tend to tell you that they like that for kick drums too?
I couldn't tell you specifically if they use one or the other. While I'm using on kick or compressing a kick, but I suspect both would be useful. Obviously, the second's going to be less obvious. As kicks are often the highest peaks in a mix, kicks and snares, the third harmonic, which scrunches those peaks, is really a big help.
Right.
You can bring those peaks down without losing the actual apparent level in the mix. And if I may, the Arouser the soft clipping in the Arouser was totally inspired to bring the peaks down and not change your ear. And we're getting ready to put out a video. We've done it in a few interviews or whatever, but one of the things that I want to do a video of is you compressing the snare, no soft clipping at all, and then using the Arouser soft clipping, you can start turning that up, and you see the peaks on the snare. All of a sudden, they drop 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 dB. The peaks go away, yet you don't hear it because it's just grabbing those milliseconds.
Yeah.
And again, it lets you get more level without actually peaking.
I absolutely noticed that the soft clipping knob was like a whole new territory for me using the Arouser. I got so excited. I started putting it on kicks and snares and like experimenting with that, just that soft clipping. You know, I'd have some sort of compression I liked, but you just dial that in until you're like, oh, wow, that's like, I might have a snare that I liked, but there's a quality sometimes in engineering and recording drums where like you record something and you like it, but you're internally flinching a little bit as you listen, you know?
Should I be doing, this is too much, or I don't know if that's right?
Yeah, or you recognize that you're in the same way that I could drive an old car that has a broken passenger door for 10 years and just ignore it. Like, and as an engineer, I could listen to drums I recorded and kind of ignore the fact that they hurt me a little bit. But when I explored those, you know, the soft clipping, it took care of that. It just sweetened off that stuff. It just, I mean, I would say that about all the stuff you make is Empirical Labs gives you the ability to dial in your sounds, especially in rock and roll and aggressive music too. And I mean, really all across the board, but with the aggressive stuff where it really can kind of hit you in the face and you're in a bad way. Empirical Labs just sort of like can smooth it, put the right smoothness across everything so that all of a sudden everything's a rock and roll, but pleasant to listen to, and you want to turn it up, you know?
Well, you know, Lidge, just because of what you're saying there, and I'm sitting here wondering, I don't think we make a product that does not offer some soft clipping. I'd have to actually go through my head. I should know off the bat, but no, since the Distressor onward, almost every one of our products has some form of soft clipping, because again, you know, it makes it easier on your ears.
Yeah. And you come from a background where you have an appreciation for that sound, you know, as somebody who was in a great rock band and making records on analog. Hopefully
I got a little bit from all those years playing music.
Awesome. Well, here we'll dive in and talk about more of the stuff you guys are making here at Empirical Labs in just a moment. Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the second half of the show, aka the Jam Session. My guest today joining us is Dave Derr from Empirical Labs. And Dave, are you ready to jam?
I'm ready to keep going, man.
Let's do it.
Second set coming up.
Let's do it. So one of the things that I like to ask guests sometimes on the show is just sort of like, what advice do you have for the rock stars who are listening? So maybe it's somebody who's younger, who's like starting out in recording and wanting to get into a life of being a recording engineer or even a music producer and do the studio world. And then another, because of course you have the dual skill of being both a musician and engineer and an electronics designer, is what advice might you have for somebody who's curious about getting into the tinkering and the electronic side of all this cool stuff we use in the studio?
They're related professions, the designer versus the recording engineer. But obviously, whenever, like a guy that designs cars, let's say a guy that designs race cars, you can bet that he's driven a lot of fast cars around a track. And so I guess I'm lucky that, I was in a band for many years and did recordings, a couple albums in the band. So I have an idea of on the user end for being a musician. But the difference, I think, is music. Being a musician, you can kind of just shred all day long and practice and kind of be ready to do live shows and do what you need to do performance-wise. With engineering, there's a lot more involved. Recording engineer needs to know his equipment. He needs to know his speakers. He needs to know his clients. And there's a lot more interpersonal communication skills necessary. Mm-hmm. Now, again, you need interpersonal skills as being in a band too, obviously.
Sure.
Otherwise, you'll get beat up and kicked out. One of the things in a studio is learning your skills is very hard to do just by yourself. There's now a lot of videos, people like you who put out services to help you learn how to record and what sounds good and what not. But when you're actually in the studio, you've got one of the key things, and I tell this to myself or even in my current interpersonal, try to be fun to work around. Try to be fun. Try to be up. You don't have to be giddy, but when you're first starting, you can't be a bastard because no one will come back to you. So try to be fun. And honestly, that's one of the secrets of life, is being grateful and acting happy, even if sometimes you're not. Feeds forward and feeds back with you and the people around you. As far as a musician, like I said, you can shred in your home and pretty much then go out on stage and do what you got to do. The great thing for people is, I'm sorry if I'm being wordy here.
No, that's quite all right. I think about the term woodshedding when you're talking about musicians just sort of keeping themselves and practicing.
Yep, exactly. And again, that can get you by. You can get in a band. You got to learn how to dress and act and hopefully move on stage. In the studio, you have to know your equipment. Then there's a lot of it, or software. And as you know, the world's changed so much. Younger people getting into the recording engineer field today have a monstrous advantage over what I was raised with. They have these DAWs that have 1,000 tracks if you want it. The DAWs where you can put 2 EQs on every single band and compression anywhere, all kinds of models. They might not be exactly, have the exact sound that the old analog stuff had, but much of it is so close now, it's imperceptible. So the ability to learn your equipment now around the recording studio is much easier these days. Because again, you've got these software tools that high school students can have in their home,
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that it's a wonderful opportunity to just explore all these plugins and stuff. I mean, like, the rock stars right now, they can go get the Arouser and the Big FrEQ. And then of course, I think the Fatso, you also have a whole line through UAD as well.
Yes.
So there's a lot of the stuff is available there. And you can start exploring it and learning it. But there's also a quality to being in a studio around somebody who's experienced and seeing them dial in sounds. So I was just in a studio recently with a fantastic engineer who was getting amazing drum sounds, and it was like, he's using the outboard gear to capture those drums too, and printing the sounds that way. There's an element of that, which is wonderful about the hardware as well. But also just seeing somebody know how to use that.
Yeah, if you want to become a serious recording engineer, the biggest piece of advice, and this is only if you're very serious, because if you want to compete with the best, work with the best. Start assisting an engineer that you love, your favorite engineer. Get donuts for them and just watch all over the place what they're doing. Assist them. Keep your eyes and ears open the whole time, because I don't know many major engineers that are household names that didn't work alongside of a household name engineer at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was a particular studio I started out at, Alex the Great, and working with Brad Jones and Robin Eaton, and they were my first mentors, and I just learned a ton from them, you know?
Yeah. I never assisted a major engineer. So that's probably why I moved into the equipment design. But
that kind of leads us to the other part of the question, which is the electronics designer. I mean, you did go do the same thing at Eventide, really, didn't you?
Yes, that's true. I worked alongside these amazing people, and you see how their workflow, you see how they work. But in the studio, as far as my studio chops, I ended up being only a C grade recording engineer. But John Patterson, the guy I mentioned earlier, who worked with Phil Ramone, he was my famous engineer guy. And I remember, here's where you can't blame the equipment. I was used to my equipment all the time, and was used to the sounds I was getting. When John Patterson came in the first day, and did the first session, I'm sitting there, and I was actually working at Eventide and still maintaining the studio. I'd gone home for the end of the day at Eventide and came back home for the end of John's first session. And from downstairs, the mix room was upstairs. From downstairs, I'm going, wow, I never realized how good things sound down here. I said, no. When I went upstairs, I said, this studio has never sounded like this. And it's the same equipment I've been using, different engineer.
Yeah.
And that was where John was very patient and really taught me so much over the years. So I can't urge you enough to work alongside the people that are your idols.
So I've noticed that in my own studio, where I can get into a system that works well. And so, it's easy to default, well, I'm going to stick to stuff that works because it works, and because people, might have a time preference to get in and out of a session. But I'm always curious about changing things up. And then occasionally another engineer comes in, and if they ask me, how I might do something, I never want to answer that, because I want them to just show me some other way of doing it.
Yeah.
So I get a chance to hear it. Do you see the same thing happening in the design and the electronics lab as well? Do you have people who will show you a different way to do a circuit or do something? Is that sure?
Yeah, I've been influenced by a lot of people. Just recently, for instance, Paul Wolf, who's from API and now has Paul Wolf Audio. He's always been invaluable with giving me succinct advice, succinct advice, not a device. And he's really good he gets right to the point. There are people, and then again, we have a lot of musicians that work for us. So when it's time to test some of our gear or software, my employees have been a valuable feedback resource. But when I was at Eventide, I was a beginner, and the only thing I knew how to do was kind of analog. So it was all about learning alongside of Ken B and Bob Belcher. So
yeah, well, that's cool. Well, so fast forward a bit, and here you are at Empirical Labs, and you've built the Distressor, and I'm not sure what the order of gear was for you, the things you designed, but I do know that one of the ones that came soon after that, I think, was the Fatso. If that
was second,
that was number
product.
2. Okay, great.
Yep.
So let's talk about that. That stands for Full Analog Tape Simulator and Optimizer, which you've always been great at naming stuff, by the way.
Well, that what was that acronym was put on after we had the term Fatso, because we wanted something, literally the whole goal of it was to fatten up both the bass, individual tracks, and the whole mixes. It was, sorry, I'm getting that screen here. It was really trying to do what tape did, but we had the choice of without adding any components to have compressors. So we added a few choice compressors in there, preset type things. That was our second product. And Liz, I'll tell you, that almost never made it out because I didn't know what it was. People said, what is a Fatso? And it's like, if you took out the compression, it's kind of a saturator, high frequency tamer, but people wanted to, they want to pin names on stuff. So it was very hard to tell people what it was. And the second part of that was looked like going to be more than twice as expensive as the Distressor.
Wow.
So I didn't really want to put us out of the range of everybody. So we came out with a stripped down version, which is the Junior. And again, that was really a hard project. That was one of the hardest ones we've done to this day because 1,000 components, a lot of tweaking. And then again, I didn't have anything to compare it to. There wasn't anything out there that was like a tape simulator with a compressor built in, and it offered 4 types of processing, if I remember correctly. You've got your soft clipping, your saturation. You've got your high frequency compression called warmth. We call it warmth on there. It's actually got a little bar graph, and it's got tranny. It's got a little transformer in there, and that adds harmonics that we tailored for low frequencies, like tape does, adds harmonics. And then you've got compression. So it's got 4 types of processing in it, and getting all 4 of those right was the good thing was for me was I didn't have any other products to pay attention to. The Distressor was out. I didn't have really any employees, maybe 1 or 2 employees. So there was very little overhead in my life besides designing that. So otherwise, if I had to design it now, it might not even come out.
And each channel, it's a stereo unit, or is the Junior mono?
No,
Junior
it's stereo
as well. So, well, I might be describing the Fatso. How do you refer to the non-Junior version? It's just the Fatso, or is it the Fatso Senior?
Well, it doesn't really exist. I had a prototype once with it was a dual height.
Okay, all right.
If I can get my hands in here. It was a dual height, double the height of the Distressor. Had a lot more knobs, very hard to adjust, very, very difficult to adjust. And again, when I looked at the price, it was going to be like $3,500 for $1,000. I didn't want it up there. So we stripped it down, and that was easy. That was the easy part, was stripping it down, honestly, because again, we had all these controls that weren't mandatory. So.
Well, I was trying to pull up the webpage there. My internet's not loading very fast, but it's got an input and an output. So again, it's a fixed threshold kind of experience like the Distressor is.
Yeah.
So the compression could be in there as a fixed threshold, and then that also pushes you into the tape features. And
yeah, the one thing, in hindsight, while I was designing it, in my head, I just kept saying, this is not a pretty product, But in hindsight, we did stuff in there that no one else has ever done, including literally you can get like 11 to 13, 14% distortion.
Wow.
Which is like beyond what even tape can do smoothly. And one of the features I'm really proud of is the high frequency limiting, which we call warmth. And again, sometimes having limitations forces you to think differently, and that was the case here. Originally, I just had a crossover, so the high frequencies were compressed separately, and I did not like that. I don't even remember why I didn't like it. It just didn't seem very organic. It chomped all of a sudden, the high frequencies disappeared.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So what we came up with was a dynamic filter, and it does attenuate the high frequencies. The bar graph is showing you what's going on at 20 kilohertz, so it's way up there.
Okay.
But the quarter frequency of that, when it shuts down, the quarter frequency moves. So the more gain reduction you have with the warmth, the quarter frequency moves up, so it's not as obvious and doesn't sound as clampy, if I may use that term.
All right. So there's clearly like the Fatso is kind of a complex new way of thinking about some of the sounds, the transformer in there, so then the button that has bus, 11, track, and spank. What's a way to describe that? Those are compression choices or something like that?
Yeah, they're compression presets, essentially.
Okay, all right.
And we pick a curve, a ratio, attack time, and release time. Every time you click one of those, all those are affected.
Right, so it's like
lock and load.
Yeah, right. It's ready. Here's a great setting and on a great compressor sound. Try this,
Yes, exactly.
All right. So how should the rock stars think about the Fatso? Let's say they're curious about getting one for their studio or even getting the plug-in. How should they think about that? I figure it's a common question for why should I get the Fatso? Should I get the Distressor or the Arouser? And should I get one or the other or both?
There's such a big difference in the price range. I think that's going to be a deciding factor for so many. Mm-hmm. I'm very proud of the Arouser. So if you want to get a taste of what our gear is about, that's the way to get in is the Arouser, because unlike any other Distressor clone, we give you some real control over the saturation, a lot of control, and it's very smooth and doesn't alias at 48 kilohertz. It's really hard to hear aliasing. Some people have told me otherwise, and I said, well, we'll do a blind test, and I want money on this, because again, that was also a navigated trip to get a real smooth saturation without aliasing.
Can I add something? Can I add a translation for the rock stars? So rock stars, when Dave says doesn't aliasing, translation, it doesn't sound like shit in your computer unplug it. That's what that stuff means.
And people that aliasing is a hard thing. First of all, unless you're really grinding the hell out of something, like you want to make a digital guitar amp, aliasing isn't usually going to happen at low distortion modes. But that being said, the distortion is part of all of our gear. So with the Arouser, we made it a very important feature with a full control over that. So if you want to taste getting started, get yourself an Arouser plug-in. It'll give you'll be happy with it. The pros are using it. We got dozens of hit records out there, probably hundreds of hit records out there with it on it now.
Yeah.
So you'll be using a pro tool. And the next price range thing is the Distressor, which again, you're going to be paying probably $1,500 or so. But that's a classic. And again, I don't think you can go wrong if you want a piece of hardware to tweak some knobs on. And the Fatso, again, that's kind of a 2-channel device. So for the extra money, you do get 2 channels. And it offers features. Again, the tranny function is literally a small transformer inside that we tailored to give really nice harmonics to low frequency stuff. So they're all different. But again, for the new guy, get an Arouser. We have sales pretty often on those. And you'll be able to get it for a little over $100. That's your gateway to how Empirical Labs products work and think.
Well, it gives you that ability to get familiar with the, fixed threshold compression, the input knob, the output knob.
Right.
All the compression ratios are very similar to the Distressor. I mean, it's
exactly
right. And then also just that ability to dial in the level of distortion that you might want to experience and appreciate. And it really does wonderful things to bring out just enough character in the voice, just enough detail on a bass, just enough shaving, coolness in a snare drum in a way that even the hardware unit is more of a fixed experience,
Yeah, exactly. Not as controllable.
And that attack mod is really cool too. The AT mod.
Yeah, again, that was born out of necessity, because when we're sitting there under a microscope listening, there was a difference that had to be addressed. But just a footnote, the soft clipping, obviously very important to our Arouser, but that was really hard. Fortunately, the developer, the engineer that did the coding, came up with an idea that was very alias free. And I was amazed, because if you just soft clip something with a real simple soft clip equation, aliasing jumps in really quickly, especially on higher frequencies. So what we did is we really didn't let higher harmonics The harmonics are all low order. Had something too. What was the other thing?
And the other thing that I learned about that aliasing is with in situations where you're creating distortion in a plug-in digital world, and the aliasing is possible. The solution is sometimes to go with a much higher sample rate for your session and run it, right? Because then it just sort of pushes it up higher out of hearing.
Yeah, and I remember what I wanted to say, which ties right in what you just commented. What happens, aliasing, you can see, people have seen aliasing all their life. They've probably heard it too, but seeing is believing. So the best example for me for a real obvious aliasing is when you're looking at a video that is shot at a frames per second, and they have something like a plane with a prop moving or wagon wheels. You'll see the prop slow up, get fast, sometimes even stop. That is aliasing. That is exactly aliasing. And what's obviously, you're looking at this prop on a plane spinning slowly. In your head, you know that's not going that slow.
Right.
And that is aliasing. And again, the bad thing about it is it's tied to the frames per second. So just like sample rate, that's frame per second in the video world. But you have to really, once you realize what aliasing is, again, you have to trust to a degree that the developer is software, has done testing and knows that it's not audible.
Right. Yeah, so, because it folds down into the frequencies that you do want to hear, and you're hearing stuff that's not what you wanted.
It's unrelated, just like that prop when it stops. That's not what's going on. It's unrelated to reality.
Right.
And that's nothing you want in your audio. So
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. So there's some other features on the Arouser that I thought I'd ask you about. So we've got the attack mod, which I think you already discussed, and then the soft clipping knob, which we talked about. Then there's the detection high pass and the detection EQ. So the EQ feature is another new addition to that became available in the Arouser and the plugin world, right?
Yeah, but you can probably guess again why the Distressor has a fixed high pass in the detector and a fixed band pass. You turn it on or off. You can't adjust it. So in the digital world, that's so easy. I mean, parametric EQs, the only thing that's bad is it adds more knobs. And sometimes you look at the Arouser and you go, oh, that's a lot of knobs on there. Again, we just took what's in the Distressor, for instance, the band pass. The band emphasis in the side chain. That's fully adjustable now. We give you little blue marks around the knobs to show you how to get the Distressor settings. But man, the world is your oyster now. You can use that side chain parametric. Try boosting if you want a de-esser, a really good de-esser. Try boosting like 6 to 8K in a wide band on that parametric side chain. We can go boost 30 dB. It turns into a really decent de-esser. We have people that say that's their favorite de-esser using that side chain. So again, we learned a lot over the years. And with the ease of putting in more elaborate side chain EQ, it was like, why not?
Well, de-essing is one of the first things I remember learning about as far as why would you EQ what's going into the detection circuit on a compressor or on something. But then the next time I heard it where I was like, oh, that's interesting. It was actually a Butch Vig interview. He was talking about recording Billy Corgan's vocals on Smashing Pumpkins.
I love Butch.
Yeah, and he said, and he talked about how, you know, that Billy has this edge to his voice that makes it so cool and unique. You know, it's like a mid-rangeness, but that by doing more of a boost in that frequency in the sidechain of compression, all of a sudden it smooths out and it makes the recording sound the way you want it. So that's a really cool feature to have in a plugin like that, or in a compressor.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, one of my earliest idols, I had quite a few recording engineer mix down idols, Bob Clearmountain.
Yeah.
I never worked with him. I did one time see a board he was working on when eyeballed when I was allowed. But Bob Clearmountain, you know, his de-essers, he built his de-essers into SSL boards. And again, I'm pretty sure this is true because a good friend of mine who worked with him said it was. He took a compressor on a channel with a vocal going through it, and he sent the signal going to the compressor to another channel with the EQ, and he'd boost the living crap out of the high frequencies, so it would respond to those high frequencies first. And of course, his ears guided him, so it worked really well.
Right.
But he basically built his de-esser with channels on his SSL.
That's wild. That's cool. All right, let's see. What else I want to ask you about? Oh, there's another new mystery button on the Arouser. It's called and it's not the first initial of my actual first name, which is Elijah, but it's the E button.
Okay.
So tell us, what's the E button in the Arouser?
That stands for expert.
Oh, I should use it more often.
Yeah. You know, again, the Arouser, part of the problem was we're competing with a Distressor, which has a lot of buttons and 4 big knobs, but we wanted to actually allow more tweakage. So imagine all the knobs you could have, and that's kind of what happened and why we went to this expert mode. We hide the seldom used controls, excuse me. But in the saturation, we have an expert section. And if you go there, hit that white expert button, all of a sudden you'll see you can adjust the second harmonic independently under this expert page. You can put the compression before or after the soft clipping. And that analogy that we use is like you're either compressing coming from tape, which is where the compression is after the soft clipping, or you're compressing going to tape where the compressor is before the soft clipper.
Right.
So you actually have those options. And again, we hid those under the expert button.
Yeah, when I think about, well, what's the default? Is it compression before tape? I'm just, you know, my engineer brain thinks about how would I have done it in the studio? You know, it would have been.
Yeah, I think you're right. The default is compressing before the saturation.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Cool. Well, and now that I know more about the second and third order harmonics, I'm going to start using that expert button and mess around with it and see what it does to bass guitars and stuff.
And again, remember I was telling you how hard it is to hear second harmonic?
Yeah.
Just for your own ears. Now you're going to hear it because there's third harmonic in there too. But just an experiment, put some music in there, maybe not much compression going on, just saturation. Turn the second harmonic all the way up, tweak that all the way up, and keep adding saturation, and you'll see it's pretty crazy. You can add, we have a meter. This is another thing we always do is really decent metering so you know where you are in the danger zone. Watch our meter and you can put 14% on there with the second harmonic turned all the way up, and it's not that obvious. The second harmonic's very hard to hear. Well,
you talking about having to have like special metering and all these measuring tools, it reminds me of many years ago in the 90s. Actually, I got to go visit Earthworks and meet David Blackmer and do a little interview with him.
Idol of mine. David Blackmer was an idol of mine.
He was such a great dude, and he talked about his path, and he wanted to build speakers.
I know,
but he realized in order to build a speaker, he needed to be able to measure it, and he couldn't none of the microphones worked to measure it. So he was like, oh crap, I'm going to have to build a microphone first. And that's where the Earthworks TC30K came out of. And then he was like, oh, well, to build microphones, I have to be able to test them. Oh crap, I'm going to have to invent a way to test the microphones.
It's a vicious circle.
Yeah. So I can see how you guys you go through these things. That's amazing.
I love David Blackmer, and I've been very lucky to know George Massenburg for many years, and he too is a big fan of David Blackmer. And one of George's sayings about David is he had an understanding of a transistor PN junction that very few people on Earth have. He really knew how to use that junction, make it temperature insensitive, and make great VCAs, etc. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought David Blackmer up, because he's an influence and inspiration.
Yeah, great guy. Conjunction junction, what's your function? All right.
Did you ever hear a speaker? By the way, I got to hear.
I heard them in his office. Yeah, he played me some race car recordings he'd done with the TC30K, and they sounded incredible. They were so loud. It sounded like a car was right there in the room.
He, he maintained that this. I don't want to get too far off subject, but he maintained that frequencies above 20K matter to humans. And very interesting articles. I suggest people go look for it. You can't hear, he didn't think you could hear 20 kilohertz steady state. In other words, you put 20 kilohertz out through a speaker. He didn't think you could hear that. But in the real world, when a rock falls 100 feet away, the high frequencies are filtered out and the transient is smeared. When a rock falls a couple feet from your head, it's a whole different experience. And he thinks that it's part of our protection, that we can sense transients above 20K because it tells us that something's very, very close. So he thought for getting a realistic experience, speakers had to go way up 30, 40, 50 kilohertz.
That's cool. I never heard him talk about the rock story, but he definitely talked about the importance of frequencies extending far beyond what you thought you needed. Because the
rock story is mine, by the way.
Yeah, like it.
His what you can find that made me come up with that story was he did tests that showed that your ears can hear transients, and a lot of that was above K. And there's a whole article, if you look up David Blackmer outer ear hairs, which are actually nerves, they don't seem to sense steady state. They sense front walls, transients coming through.
Wow, fascinating stuff. And that's honestly, that's not off topic. I mean, this stuff is so much fun to talk about.
David Blackmer was brilliant. And by the way, we've used his parts in many of our products, and they've always been really great. And now a company called That bought all the license to all his parts.
Oh, wow.
So those are the manufacturers we use.
Okay, cool. Let me rewind a little bit. We were just talking about the Arouser, but I had a question for you about the Distressor too, and then I want to move forward to some other stuff. There are also some buttons and knobs on the Distressor. Where did I put my notes? I'll just do it from memory. Oh, here it is. You see British mode in a couple of places. You see a 1-to-1 compression ratio, but then you also see a British mode 1-to-1 switch that's over on this. So I have the EL8X.
X.
Yeah. And so it's got a switch on it, and then it's also got a stereo link switch, which I think that one's probably obvious for stereo compression. But I'd love it if you wanted to explain, like, what's that British thing do? Or how do we think about it?
I'm very lucky to have known some really major engineers that were idols also. In this case, Michael Brower from New York, my friend John Patterson, the same guy who told me to get 1176 and inspired me in my own studio, took a early Distressor to Michael Brower. And I didn't know who he was. I'm ashamed at the time. This is, again, probably right around 1990, 91, 92, something like that. And then in 95, that was when I started associating with John Patterson. And then in 95, when we put out the Distressor, John took a Distressor to Michael Brower in the city. And Michael was, oh my gosh, he was, I'm ashamed I didn't know who he was at the time. But he called up and he said, is this Dave? I go, yeah. He goes, you make the Distressor? I go, yeah. He goes, I want to come out and see where they're made. And I go, why? He goes, because I really like this thing, and I'm just curious, where you are, and I know you're in Jersey. And of course, I'm working out of this shabby little house, and it's just it's like, Billy Bob starting in his house. And so I didn't have anything I was really proud of, but that's exactly what he wanted to see.
Yeah.
Because he said, I think this is going to be big. And I said, oh, that's good to hear. And I said, sure, come on out. So this, I think it was a BMW, pulls up out front. And I'm kind of like, oh, that's a car that's never been in my driveway before. And Michael was so sweet, so down to earth, and had questions. And one of them was, do you think you can do the Brit mode, which is 4 buttons in? Because I use that quite a bit in my mixes and stuff. At the time, I kind of said, well, no, we're just getting this out now. This is probably, like I said, 94, 95. Oh, but when he left, we've been friends ever since. And if you ever meet Michael, he's just a warm, engaging person. Yeah. On top of being just cutting records. So when he left, that turned for a year or two. And then this other thing was people wanted to be able to lock them. We had a we had a phase link, if I may again use my hands and get them in the picture this time. Initially, there we go. Initially you couldn't really lock the phase between left and right. So not the phase, the level between left and right. But what we did do was you could sum the signals together and present them to the detectors equally. But that didn't guarantee that the channel gain reduction would match between left and right. So we needed image link. So when we came up with image link, it was a good time to consider any other features because it required separate PC boards and new circuitry. And at that point, I started playing with all buttons in mode on my lovely old 1176. Found out what that was doing, and it wasn't a nightmare to do on the Distressor at all. But making it consistent was. So anyway, that's how the Brit mode happened, same time as image link. And I forget what year it was, but it was, I'd say before 2000 that we released the X version of the Distressor. Okay, so on an 1176, if I push in all 4 buttons, I can just bring up the input and the output and adjust the attack and release. And usually the meter goes like, it tries to leap out of the meter the wrong direction, but it still moves, and it does, it sort of acts like I can tell what it's doing. If I want to try that on the EL8X, do I flip the Brit switch, and do I also put the ratio on 1:1? Because I saw Brit written in 2 places. Exactly. The fact is that on the 1176, with all 4 buttons in, you go to a really weird all new ratio that not any one of the single buttons gets you. So that was the hard part, was that we didn't have a ratio that fit that. So what we did was we turned 1:1. When you enable it, 1:1 becomes the curve of the 1176 Brit mod ratio. It's different than all our other curves. And originally we were going to kind of fix it so that when you selected the 1:1 with it enabled, the Brit mod was on, and no other ratio could it be turned on. But I'm like, oh geez, the Brit mod sounds really fun in all the ratios. So we'll just let it be applied as a separate switch to any ratio. Oh, cool. All right, great. So with the switch, I can flip it, and then I can just change my ratio and use whatever I want, and I'm getting a little bit of everything. Yeah, you'll still get the Brit mod effect, which is largely an attack thing and release. It drastically speeds up the attack, but in a different way than just speeding up the attack knob.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. Very cool. Very cool. Well, let me jump forward. There's one thing we haven't talked about. I mean, you have a lot of products at Empirical Labs, and if you want, we can mention them all. But particularly EQ is another one that's really important. So the Big FrEQ. That's another wonderful hardware that you've moved over to EQ, or I guess which one came first? Was it hardware first, then EQ, then plug-in, or the other way around?
No, the hardware came first. The little FrEQ came first.
Yeah.
And again, the goal was to offer a super lot of processing power in a single height box.
Yeah.
We might have overdone it a little bit. But we also offered transformer output, a Neve type circuit that did the same harmonic stuff to low frequencies as 1073. And then again, it's 8 sections, a lot of EQ in there. And then we did our Big FrEQ, which was in the box plug-in.
Yeah, and the Big FrEQ is the one that I have, and it's a really cool EQ. One of the things I noticed about it right away is you can do extreme stuff on it that I wasn't used to doing on the other EQs, and really have fun with it, like tonal resonance kind of sounds if you want to.
Absolutely.
But it seems like the way you envisioned EQs is new and different too. So it's got things like filters, high and low pass filters. It's got high and low shelf in it. It's kind of like as much EQ as you might ever need all in one
that
plug-in.
Was kind of a goal. Yeah, really was. And of course you can never really do that because people use, especially pros that have access to all kinds of hardware. They'll mix and match. They'll use this EQ to bring out the low end, this EQ to soften the top end or whatever.
Yeah.
But the goal was to kind of have, I mean, it's got to be one of the most powerful analog EQs as far as sections out there. But again, trying to get everything into one box is always overachievement, I think. So
yeah. Well, with the plug-in, I mean, we have 8 individual band EQs. Is that right? So we've got the filters, the high and low pass. It's not, my browser's not letting me pull it up right in front of me, but it's a multitude of bands, I know for sure. And they have really, it was something very new to me, which was the bell curve you can go narrow, you can go wide, but you can also kind of square it off.
Yeah.
So what's that all about?
That's something you can't do in analog. We have 6 parametric bands in there, and our parametric bands have an extra control called slope, and that's what enables you to get that kind of flat top shape. You normally have a bell curve that goes, it's a bell shape. What this enables you to do is steepen the sides, flattens out the top a little bit, so you can grab more frequencies gently. It's very musical because, sometimes to get the effect, you have to boost a whole bunch of bell and you end up with a very peaky sound because you've got that center point. With this slope control, you flatten that top out and you're now grabbing a series of, you're not doing this, getting the camera.
Right. It's not a little
you're
triangle.
doing this. Yeah, and you can boost less and get the same effect or similar effect as boosting more. And to me, whenever you have to boost, I kind of modified some parametrics back when I had my studio, because like with some instruments, tom and kick drum, again, my friend John Patterson showed me pull out 250 hertz, 10 dB, you know, and all of a sudden the sound is much better, or 400 hertz, something like that. So that always scared me. And sometimes it's not a good thing to pull out a standard parametric that far. But once you got that flat top, or what they call band shelf is the technical name for that filter, where it's flat at the top. Once you start using that, you don't have to do that 10 dB scoop. All of a sudden, you're grabbing more frequencies, and you might do maybe 4 or 5 dB to get the similar effect and open up the sound.
Okay, very cool. So the scoop is something that I remember learning with a kick drum, for example. The mic inside a kick drum has sort of a basketball box quality to it that
you don't like that?
Sometimes.
You don't like basketball?
Yeah, basketball is my favorite sport. And then learning that from a great mixer, and seeing them like pull a ton of 250 out, and I was like, whoa, that kick sounds so much more expensive than I remember recording it in my studio, you know. So what's cool about hearing you describe this is with the big FrEQ, we could actually get that effect, but not have to suck so much out, which also makes it, sometimes taking a lot of EQ out of something makes it sound like a new alien version of the same instrument.
Yeah, you start to warp all the things that make it a kick drum or toms, But yeah, and again, you know, the flat top again was reassuring to me, which it was a nightmare to do, by the way, because the bandpass filter that presents that flat area is a relatively new math equation. It was, I don't think it's more than 10 years old, which is new in the math world. But incorporating that into our EQ really made a big difference, because the first thing I did was go EQ some kick drums and toms. You know, again, all of a sudden, I can remember in the day, because I didn't have great mics, I remember early on using a 421 which is a pretty good mic, but using that on the kick drum, and my God, you really got to pull out those low woolly mids. Yeah. So literally, I'm not kidding you, pulling over 10 dB during tracking just so I can get level on tape. Which is very scary to think about in hindsight. But first thing with a big FrEQ was, let me get the kick up here that's not been EQ'd, and realizing 5-6 dB would be way more than I needed once you flatten that top out and grab more frequencies.
Okay, cool. Well, that gives me something to go try out next, so I'm excited to dive back into the big FrEQ and try what you just described. And now I do have to say, what we're all thinking is like, hey, are you ever going to make a cool looking Empirical Lab controller that will control our plugins but have all the cool knobs that we can use? That'd be so much fun.
Oh, we have a couple of people, including Willie, who would have been pushing for that. Really would like us to do a hardware controller with our big white knobs. And of course we could bring other things to it also. But so yeah, that's been requested, and so far I haven't jumped into that game. It's hard to sell someone a piece of hardware that's going to sit on their desk next to the mouse, you know?
Right. Is it? Yeah.
Because, you know, the mouse can basically cover anything, but it is a good feeling to grab a knob and be able to control your software. We don't have immediate plans, but it's on our list of things to look into.
I guess you just get the hardware anyway, right?
That's it.
So one of the things I want to say, and this is sort of a message to our listeners, to the rock stars, is a reminder of a way to think about hardware. So we've got we're in home studios, we've got plugins, and you think about like, oh wow, I can put one anywhere I need it, I can use one. And then sometimes when you think about hardware, you think, oh, that's so awesome, but is it limiting, or do I need many? Well, it's just a reminder that having the hardware gives us this amazing ability to really sculpt a sound at the recording capture process.
Yes.
And
right.
then for recording drums, and we're like, oh, I don't have that many pieces of hardware for every mic I might use. Maybe we're more selective. Maybe we say, I'm gonna sculpt the room mics just so that we really hear that excitement during the tracking stage.
Excuse me.
But just a reminder that it's not that hard to then go back through what you've recorded and one by one just run the tracks back out through the Distressor, for example. Dial it in, sweeten it up, reprint it back in. And I've done mixes like that where it's really transformative, So even a limited collection of, these amazing Empirical Labs hardware units in your studio can go a long way. It can cover you on all the stuff you're recording, whether you use it on tracking or mixing.
Oh, that's good to hear. Again, the mother of invention, and when I was actually trying to make a living, I did make a living recording people, but I wanted more of that. And so sometimes, I literally, there was a period in my life, I've been blessed, but there was a period in my life, where I lived on peanut butter sandwiches. And so I couldn't afford, there was a time where I couldn't afford stuff. So again, as I'm making my own stuff, I did eventually have money, but during that period of designing, I was using the stuff and trying to make it as useful and magical as possible.
That's the way it feels. I mean, it feels like you know what it's like to record when I use what you've built,
Thank you. Compared to real people, I don't. I was able to, I've been very, very lucky, just a number of factors. But I always, again, with the Distressor, it was really because I want more of the LA2A 1176 vibe, and I can't afford to buy it. So, and again, very, very lucky that the first prototype, which we still have, actually had the sound right off the bat.
Yeah.
If it didn't, if I had to fuss with that, sometimes that's discouraging enough to make you go elsewhere.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for the ignorance of youth. When we're younger, we're willing to just dive in and not come out of our submarine until we've finished creating the thing we're trying to create,
Exactly. And there's a lot of parallels to writing music to designing equipment. Sadly, a lot of it is very private time, but agonizing over certain transitions and details, There's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Well, let me see here. We're coming on the end of the show here. I thought I'd just give a shout out to some of the other cool stuff that the Rockstars might find over on the website. You have something called the Mic E.
Yep. And it is a mic preamp. And again, we're very proud of that performance. We now just recently started having some classical people use it because of it's super quiet, 130 dB. We measure every unit at 40 dB of gain. The dynamic range of signal to noise is 130 dB.
That is almost the space shuttle taking off. I think, in fact, it was David Blackmore, I think, who said 140 was the space shuttle and the TC-30K could handle it.
Oh God, that's the scary thought, isn't it?
So you're right there, dude.
And then we also, again, because we like to add those little smushy sounds with saturation, we have some saturators in there. We've got, this is the mic preamp, called a Mikey, and we have a compressor. We put in a compressor, basically fixed attack and release times. You have 4 choices of each, I believe. And we give you less ratios than the Distressor, but full sound, full Distressor sound. And again, for tracking, very, very fun to use. You can, I don't encourage newbies to track with compression, but we give you very gentle ratios if you want to experiment with it. And we also give you 2 outputs. So one can be compressed and one can be straight to your recorder without compression.
So Dave, you might find this entertaining, but been there, done that as the newbie tracking with compression. Hate to throw you under the bus, but it was the Distressor that I used on the snare drum because it's so cool, Okay. And sure enough, I compressed it more than it needed in the tracking stage. And guess who undid it for me in the mix stage?
I can't imagine.
It was Steve Albini. He pulled out an expander and he sat there and he dialed it in and he was like, okay, I think you did this with the compressor so we can kind of, put it back in shape. So, but again, to my point earlier, Rockstars, yet another reason why, if you've got a Distressor and you're recording drums, maybe put it on the room mics where you really want all that explosiveness, and then reprint your kick and your snare through it where you can get a little bit more careful at the mix stage.
Yeah.
And you won't overcompress it,
We had, I'm telling you, it's learning things that way. Usually you'll only do that once.
Right.
And we had people who tracked drums with Nuke on.
Where do people tell you I use Nuke? Where do people say, like, Nuke, it's the secret sauce for blah, blah, blah?
Usually just, I'd say ambience mics, room mics, etc. Yeah. But this was early on, this is probably 20 years ago, I guess. And somebody called up and said, we got a couple Distressors and we were playing with it and we put it on Nuke and it was like, whoa, this is a whole new sound. So we ran everything through it.
That's hilarious.
And we were kind of like, no, that's not how you do it. But again, I think we actually recommended that they use DBX expander to possibly take some of that off. But you can't undo compression exactly.
Yeah. I remember visiting Joe Baldrich when he was in a studio here, and he was showing me how he had, I think it was Supermodel was the band from the UK or something that he was mixing, and he was showing me how he was using the Distressors as his mix bus compressors. And he had them dialed in just right. He had it all sweet spotted out, and I was like, man, that sounds great. So nice thing about, the Distressor that you built, Dave, is it's an iconic piece of gear that literally accompanies you through your entire recording career. For somebody like me, it showed up at the beginning. It's right here all the way through.
Wow, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Sometimes just like with writing songs or being an artist, you don't get any feedback while you're trying to create this thing because there's nobody out there interested.
Yeah.
So getting this feedback now is really great. It warms my heart, but just for designers and recording engineers, you got to pay dues before you start. I'm very lucky now that hear these kind words from you, but like recording your own songs and when you start designing equipment, you got to just get it out into people's hands and get honest opinions back and listen to them. And that can help you.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had to trust your own ears in that beginning too, just like your own vision for what you think would sound good.
Yeah, and again, I had John Patterson, my good friend. And one footnote about John too, he was the engineer that I told you about, came into my studio and made it sound like an actual pro studio.
Yeah.
John was working with Phil Ramone, just a quick story, and this goes back to your previous question. They were recording it at Phil's home up in New York somewhere. They had it was basically, I think it was a converted stable or something they were recording in. And again, they needed a bigger sound. I had given John, who had been there when I started the Distressor, said, can I take the Distressor there? Because I know you got this 20-to-1, which I know sounds pretty cool on room mics. And I was like, I don't know. This is Phil Ramone. I don't want to end my career before it starts. And he goes, no, I know when it sounds bad. I won't mess it up. So they took it up there, and he called me like the next day. He goes, this is working really well, but I have a request. And I go, what? Because anything John said I was up for. He goes, can you go to a higher ratio than 20-to-1? And I go, well, yeah, sure. But, you think you'll hear it? He goes, yeah, we'll definitely hear it. And I was like, okay. Increased the ratio that night and gave him the Distressor on his way to Phil's next day because he goes, that's it. He goes, this is it. We got a nice room sound now. And I goes, okay, well, I guess I'll add this as another ratio in there. But John, what am I going to call it? 100-to-1 or 200-to-1 or what? He goes, how about Nuke?
That's great.
And that was how Nuke came into being a name of one of the ratios from my big influence and best friend, John Patterson.
For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s. And it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Simzik said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. That's amazing. I love that story. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's see, two things I was going to say too. The Doc Derr, which I guess is like a 500, you call it like a tone shaper EQ, right?
Yeah. The Doctor is, just quickly, its initial intent was actually kind of as a preamp. My test source for that was largely terrible sounding. What was the brand that was screechy guitar brand?
For guitar
plastic guitars.
Amps? For the guitars themselves?
It's on the tip of my brain. Anyway, I had this acoustic that sounded very bad. And people deal with bad acoustic sounds every single minute of the day, every single minute of their life. So my thought was, I want to make something that we can get rid of that plastic sound. We can add some sustain, get rid of that brittle attack. That was our test source, was this acoustic guitar. And again, my lovely wife is a really good songwriter, singer.
Are you talking about the Ovation?
The Ovation. I lost that thread there.
That was my first guitar, I think.
Yeah,
it was
again,
everything
I don't
you
want
just
to disparage
described.
them.
No, but they started by building like highly desired guitars, I think.
They played good, and they were the first electric guitar that you could turn up really loud and not get feedback, right? And they had a lot of good things for it, but that piezo or ceramic pickup, whatever it is, thank you for remembering that name. I can't believe I forgot it after living with that thing for a year or two. But yeah, I ended up using that, and of course the EQ, pulling out that 3.5 to 4K stuff is key to that. So the Doctor was originally named something else. I won't give you the name because we might bring it back. But yeah, it was originally just a preamp, had a gain jumper. You could add 10, 15 dB of gain. But very quickly, with Gil Griffith, our marketing guy and distributor, giving it out to some people, they said, oh, we like this on vocals. We love this on bass. We love this on all kinds of stuff that I never really even tested it with, including master bus stuff. It's got a little EQ in it, and some compression in there, and some gain adjustment, so you can use it for preamp. And
so it does not have a mic pre in it, or it still does?
It cannot do low impedance mics like with 40 dB of gain. You can't do that with a Doctor. Now, if you have a high impedance mic with pretty hot output, it'll work with that. And that's what some people use it for, believe it or not.
Okay, cool. And then there's another item called the Distressor. The Distressor.
Yeah, that's a de-esser. We made several versions of that, but we basically wanted to have a really easy to use de-esser, and we basically added some extra functions. One of my favorite functions is it has two modes, the DS mode and the HF, high frequency, limit mode. Again, let me see if I can get my hands in here.
There you go.
The DS mode looks at what's going on in the background. So it's got two detectors. It's got one that says, here's the DS frequencies.
So Rockstars, for you listening on the audio-only podcast, he's like sleepwalking. He's like Frankenstein sleepwalking to show us, with hands out to show us these levels.
He sounded asleep the whole time anyway. But yeah, so the DS mode does this thing where if there's program material going on around it that might mask the S's, which is a real thing, it won't kick in as quick. It'll literally, if there's a bunch of material in the S range, it's not going to kill those S's because you're going to need those to cut through. Conversely, if there is nothing going on around the S's, they become much more obvious, and the threshold kicks in earlier.
So that is when you say other things around the S's, is that within the input signal, or is that on a side chain as well or something?
No,
just within the
input signal. If the input has a bunch of mid-range stuff that will cover up those S's, they're not going to bother you too much.
Right.
But a vocal out there all by itself, those S's are going to jump out.
That's cool. I like the way you come up with unique solutions in gear.
Well, we weren't the first to make something program dependent on what's going on around it. But the other thing we brought was this high frequency limiter, Lidge, and that basically doesn't care what's going on around it. And we gave it a knee. So, and I had been in a mastering studio a few years earlier, and they were using it was a Scully with
the tape machine.
Yeah, I'm having a blank again. With who made a limiter? There was a high frequency limiter for it. Neumann did it, actually. Neumann made the lathe, and it had a high frequency limiter.
Oh, right.
And that thing was so smooth. It left a lasting mark on how you can smooth the high end. So
that was probably for a cutting lathe, right? For vinyl.
Yeah, exactly.
Because otherwise you burn out your cutting needles.
Yeah, and over the saturation of the actual grooves, that was a real thing. So I remember that it had a need because I actually at one point took one of my analyzers and looked at it. So basically we kind of made a HF limiter in the Distressor that does a very similar thing. It can really soften the high end. It can do de-essing, but it's more meant for just general high frequency taming when there's pileups.
That's high frequency taming where there's pileups. I love it. That's a quote right there. Well, Dave, I just want to say a huge thank you for hanging with us so long at Recording Studio Rockstars. I've got a closing question for you that I like to ask all the guests. It's a hypothetical question, and we get to take the Wayback Studio, or electronics lab machine, the Wayback Empirical machine, and you go back in time and you find young Dave, and you say, "Yo, Dave, put down that peanut butter sandwich." Sorry, there was not even jelly in it. I understand. And you say, "Listen,
I like bananas until I got an allergy to it." But anyway,
me too, dude. I used to come back on Tuesdays, which was early day from school. I'd come back and I'd make a quadruple peanut butter and banana sandwich,
so good,
and watch Gilligan's Island.
That's funny.
But you go back and find young Dave and you say, "Listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
As a recording engineer?
Your choice. Player's choice.
Yeah, again, as a recording engineer, because there's more recording engineers than there are equipment designers. Again, work alongside people that are really amazing, people that you idolize, because you'll look over their shoulders and learn stuff you not going to learn on your own. I actually have a couple notes here about this question.
Cool.
Know your equipment. Be prepared. Guy comes in, know everything's going to work and how to set up. So that's experience. And again, checking your stuff before the session starts. I already said it's very important to be easy and fun to work with. The guys here, I'm a miserable bitch in the morning, literally before my coffee, because I work till 4 a.m. a lot.
Oh, wow.
For hours, my crazy hours. And so I come in, I got to get that coffee, but I'm trying to temper and be able to, as hard as it is to answer a civil question sometimes when you feel like crap, learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Always be have a smile and a good attitude and be fun. Learn some jokes so you can break up the tense moments. Excel, spreadsheets. I can't emphasize how important spreadsheets have been in my life. Are you an Excel user, Lidge?
Well, you Google Docs, Excel, same thing, spreadsheets. Yeah. Once I discovered that, I was like, wow, you can do that with this thing? I had no idea.
Excel or the Google, I forget what's called, numbers or pages. Is it Sheets?
Yeah,
I thought that was...
Google Sheets is the spreadsheet, and then...
Okay, you're right.
Docs
I remember that.
I'm looking at a doc right now. It's our notes.
Yeah.
Or my questions.
I'm telling you, spreadsheets are so useful for your whole life. Everything from grocery lists to when you're in the studio, making a note of EQs used, how many tracks, what stuff you haven't done, and member names, try to learn their names quickly.
Yeah.
Excel is just a wonderful tool. You can graph things in it. For instance, when I was saving up for my 24 track, I was kind of working in a vacuum. This is before my friend was involved. And again, tracking stuff and keeping notes was all over the place for me. I just started using Excel, kept phone numbers in there, track of clients. Learn Excel because you can track budgets, track cost of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really a great tool. You can use it as just a database of names, band names, equipment that you need or whatever. So that's the other thing. I think that might be the major points.
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, learning how to use a spreadsheet, because when you're doing independent record making, you have somebody says like, how much is it going to cost to do this? And you have to work out budgets quickly, and you get used to just like laying all that out. I do that for every trip. Every time I'm going to go out to NAMM, I lay out a little budget just to see how much it's going to cost me to go do a trip, and things like that.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately,
really
it's very scary sometimes, isn't it?
Well, I don't have to pay
I
for
don't
a
want
booth.
to spend that much.
Yeah. But then also, even on the front end with shared documents, having an assistant in the studio where we would have a shared mic list, for setup, where I could go through a spreadsheet, say, use these mics or these signal chains on an instrument. And I walk in there and he's already had the notes and set it up exactly the way
he's underway.
I wanted. Yeah. Or maybe he came up with a better idea anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far, with any profession, any art, the most important thing is just get started doing it. Just start doing it.
Yeah.
If you want to be a recording engineer, you get yourself a little home studio. It doesn't cost hardly anything, a few $100s now, and you're in. As equipment designer, if you want to design equipment or software, get C Basic or C++ for software. Get yourself, if you want to do hardware, get yourself a soldering iron. Start soldering, man. Start doing it.
Yeah. Especially, my tip would be start soldering while you can still see what you're doing. I've got my reading glasses on here.
Yeah. I've been pretty lucky with nearsight, but the sooner you start in every way is better for you.
Yeah. Well, so let the rock stars know how they can, where would you like them to go to learn more about Empirical Labs, find you? What if they got more questions and they just want to reach out and find out what they need to get for their studio?
Well, first of all, we got our website, empiricallabs.com. We have a lot of little blog-like things on there that you can read. We give various information out.
Yeah.
I have a Facebook account, an Instagram account, a Twitter account I don't really use very much, but I have some social media accounts.
We'll include links to those in the show notes as well, Rockstars.
Okay. Yeah, and don't, again, no one should be offended if I don't let you be a friend or something, because I'm actually getting close to a limit on a couple of them. So. Oh,
you're talking about Facebook stuff. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And everything. I try to be, when I first started, you everybody's your friend, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, okay, well, this is a guy I've actually known for 40 years, and I don't have room for him. So, yeah, so that's a good way to get a hold of us. And again, look on, we have video on our website, which may give you some valuable information.
That's great. Do you guys also just have support email when people have questions and stuff like that?
Yeah. So we have support at empiricallabs.com.
Oh, actually, that reminded me to ask you something. I forgot to ask it, but it's an important point, which is you had mentioned that one of the things you were proud of at Empirical was that, when you buy a piece of gear, an important one like the Distressor, for example, it's not only is it able to be upgraded in the future, I think you said that, but you guys are going to be there for if we ever need repairs on something down the road, you're there for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, even if say we sold the company or when something horrible happened, we have 2 people here who can service just about everything.
That's great.
And they are very excited about someday, doing this on their own, possibly even, but they're dedicated to it and they're experts. So there'll always be someone that can fix your stuff.
That's awesome.
Our main goal is that it doesn't break.
Right, totally, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a Distressor need to go back in for a repair. So
it happens. You can't. It's inevitable. But we did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
To meet one of those goals of being very reliable. FYI, we eliminate pretty much all internal connections. There's no connectors in there that you plug that have a movable joint. We try to solder everything, and almost all of our, to this day, all of our hardware products are pretty much follow that no connector rule.
The no connector rule. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I remember learning what MCI stood for from my friend Steve Sadler here. He said stands for most connections intermittent.
God. Oh, that's terrible.
Which was it was just a joke about the he always said if something's intermittent, it's a connection somewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, I learned the hard way through my early prototypes, with a lot of connectors. Because it's very convenient to have connectors. But once you got your design done, I just go about eliminating all those connectors because solder lasts forever theoretically.
Yeah. Nice. Well, so I want to give a reminder to the rock stars that Dave has generously provided us with a coupon code. Again, if you'd like to go check out the Arouser or the Big FrEQ plugin, and hopefully we'll see more plugins there in the future of all the other cool stuff you're making. And it is RSR10 for 10% off. So thank you for that, Dave.
Our pleasure. Are you kidding? It's an honor to be asked to do this.
Well, man, it's an absolute honor to hang out with you. Thank you so much for taking so much of your time to do this with us today.
Well, it's kind of about time we did something serious, right? After knowing each other for 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always love coming by and seeing you at the events and, doing video stuff, but it's really cool to just sit down and talk with you for this long.
I loved it too. My pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, Rockstars. Dave, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. iZotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lid Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.